Sometimes looking into the face of what you fear most is a revelation. I've been afraid of lots of things in my life, like small commuter-type prop planes, for no good reason. I've made a promise to myself never to fly on one. It annoys my private pilot brother no end. It occasionally inconveniences traveling companions, but just knowing that I have that rule makes me feel a little safer. Then came the day that I flew to California to visit my in-laws. Out of the jetway I walked, looking around with anticipation, and saw no one there to meet me. Because, as I soon learned, after running through O'Hare Airport to catch my connecting flight, I'd boarded the wrong plane. I was supposed to be at John Wayne Airport. Instead, I was in Santa Barbara, more than 160 miles away. My husband's family was clearly relieved to learn why I hadn't been on the flight that they had met, but not quite relieved enough to drive 2.5 hours each way to pick me up. They graciously bought me a ticket on the next flight out from Santa Barbara, and it was only when I stepped onto the tarmac and saw the waiting aircraft that I realized the ugly choice confronting me. Take my very life into my hands and violate my no-prop plane rule, or risk the justifiable wrath of my in-laws. So I chose the less fearful of the two options, and I took the flight, which arrived without incident. There was a time when I was scared, almost literally speechless, at the prospect of delivering a sermon. But for sheer terror, nothing beats the night of my 34th birthday. My youngest son was not quite a month old. My husband and I had called a sitter and left for an evening of dinner and dancing. It's a frosty January night. The snow that's been falling most of the day has been almost cleared from the roads. We meet up with some friends in a popular entertainment district in Kansas City and dance the night away till 3 a.m. As we leave, the night is clear, and the mostly deserted streets are wet with melted snow. On the ride home, I start to think about my baby and hoping he's sleeping peacefully and I can just go right to bed. Suddenly, the cars jolted violently forward. We've been rear-ended. Well, the streets are still a little slick. We pull over. The road is well lit, a few cars are passing by, and the car behind us that hit us pulls over too. We wait for an explanation, an apology, the obligatory exchange of information, but nothing happens. And suddenly I feel something's not right. I'll just get out and check the damage, my husband says. No, I say, no, stay in the car, let's get out of here. But it's too late. He's out. Not 10 seconds later, his door opens again, and into the driver's seat jumps a fierce-looking man. Give me your money, he shouts, all of your money. But I have no money, and he has a gun. I feel numb, like I'm watching this happen to someone else. They take my husband's wallet and my credit cards. They tell us to wait 10 minutes before leaving. As they drive off, they deliberately ram into the side of our car in a parting shot of contempt. And now that it's over, I'm terrified. At the police station, the cynical detective tells me, now you know what it is to be a victim. No one's invulnerable. You're fine. Go home to your baby. And for days, I sleep or try to sleep with all the lights on. I imagine noises in the night. And one day, just as I'm starting to feel a little close to normal again, the detective calls me. They've caught some suspects. They need me for a lineup. Just thinking about facing this huge, monstrous, evil dude, even behind a two-way mirror, is daunting. But I'm ready to be a good citizen. At the station, they bring in the suspect and plunk him down in a chair facing the mirror. Wait, this can't be right. In front of me is a young boy, maybe 14, the age of my older son, looking frightened and vulnerable. The detectives are sure, and they must be right, but I can't honestly make an identification. And gradually, in the days that follow, the terror goes away. And I tell you this very true story, not because it means anything in itself. I never found out more about the boy or his companions, but because it's symbolic. Now, I'm pretty sure that detective was no theologian. But what he told me that night, however abruptly, is pretty much the same thing as this, written by Unitarian Universalist minister and theologian Reverend Rebecca Parker, the president of Star King School for the Ministry. If you care deeply about life, if you have a heart of love and a sense of the sacred, you are going to come up against the way life is at risk. You just are. If you are numb to the ways life is at risk, you lose track of your love for life. Facing into fear is a spiritual task. Now, you know and I know that there are more examples than we can name of the ways that people act out of fear. Sending children out waving signs that say, "God hates fags." Waging preemptive war. Building walls to keep out the aliens. Proclaiming that whatever tribe we belong to is number one. And sometimes fear is a symptom of deep trauma or underlying medical conditions that requires treatment by professionals, not the sort of fear we're talking about today. But on some level, we're all afraid. Have you ever said no to a new opportunity or a challenge, a great job, a promising relationship, a move to an unfamiliar place, physical or metaphorical? Maybe afraid you wouldn't succeed, and what would people think? What would you think about yourself? Fear is a powerful motivator. That existential knowing that we and our loved ones are vulnerable, ironically has the power to disconnect us from others and from our own best selves. Do you know about the Enneagram? Familiar with that? Some of you are. It's an ancient model of human personality. It's a method for self-understanding and spiritual development that's been modernized and validated for use by psychologists and other professionals. And here's how it works. There are 9 personality types set for life during very early childhood. So your innate characteristics develop in response to your environment. And your type itself never changes. But throughout life, you learn to use those characteristics in a healthy, spiritually mature, productive way. Unless you don't. And that has a lot to do with fear. The sort of deep, internalized fear that we act out of, usually with no awareness at all. In the Enneagram, each personality type is associated with a specific existential fear, like fear of being unloved, fear of worthlessness, fear of helplessness, fear of being without support. Type 8s, that's my type, fear being controlled, that others might have power over them. 8s are strong, assertive, resourceful, decisive. Studying the Enneagram, I came to realize exactly how my personality had formed its 8ness before the age of 3. Nothing traumatic or even dysfunctional, just a strong-willed child feeling threatened by an overprotective mother. I've worked hard to understand that fear, face it down, and become the best 8 I can. And that's important spiritual work because, listen, a very highly evolved 8 is, to quote one Enneagram guide, self-restrained, magnanimous, merciful and forbearing, courageous, willing to put self in serious jeopardy to achieve their vision and have a lasting influence, may achieve true heroism and historical greatness. Pretty much anyone who knows me will tell you I'm not quite there yet. But an 8, acting cluelessly under the influence of that fear, feeling threatened, looks like this. Vengeful, barbaric, brutally destroying everything that has not conformed to their will rather than surrender to anyone else, murderous, sociopathic tendencies. Learning to work with your own particular fears makes a difference to you and to your world. Dr. Martin Luther King is believed to have been an 8, as is Saddam Hussein. Jamal Yogis is an award-winning author who wrote The Fear Project. He spent the last few years studying fear and why so much of the time it dominates our lives. He's interviewed some of the world's leading neuroscientologists and psychologists and doctors about why we're afraid and how to manage such a primal emotion. Of course, fear's an incredibly strong motivator because it's the way the human race has survived. We sense danger, and our bodies react automatically, preparing us for the flight or fight or sometimes the freeze response. It's important that we understand this, Yogis says. Fear is something in here, and not something out there that's going to get us. And that most of the time, fear lies. It lies. And so one of the most important steps in facing fear is confronting the lie. Even if your evolutionary baggage gets your brain to send your body the message that if you walk into that job interview, if you approach that attractive, intriguing stranger, if you get your flu shot, if you confront your critic, chances are you're not putting yourself in mortal danger. There's actually very little possibility you may need to run away or launch into hand-to-hand combat to survive those situations, no matter what lies your body is telling you. But sometimes fear tells the truth, and those times we ignore it at our peril. In his book, Yogis tells the story of the birth of his son and what he calls the hawks and the hippies. The baby was very large. It looked like the birth might be difficult. So the doctor, who was the president of a prestigious medical association, assisted by other specialists who'd saved a lot of lives. These were the hawks. They kept emphasizing all the risks. The labor could take days. A C-section was a good possibility. The mother would probably be in great pain and need drugs. And at the same time, the couple was working with some non-medical professionals, the hippies, who encouraged them to think positively, to envision a pleasant birth, and say affirmations like, "My body is the perfect size for my baby," every night before bed. Clearly, Yogis says, both groups were right. They needed to be cautious, but be able to relax enough to minimize the need for interventions. The hippies and the hawks should be working together, he said, but they seem to hate each other. The couple tried to learn from both groups, and they developed this mantra: prepare, 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 then let go. That's a mantra for life. Remember to act. Get the information. Take reasonable precautions. Prepare. Fasten your seatbelts. Get regular checkups. Do your research. Make a budget. Lock your doors. Then let go. Trust your instincts. Trust your information. And remember, in spite of all our preparation, we're never in complete control. All the scientific research points to the fact that exposure to whatever we're afraid of, facing our fears, acting in spite of them, is what ultimately lets us overcome them. That's the science. But it's faith that gives us the courage and brings us the peace to let go. Because ultimately, fear is about love. The love of our own lives. The love of the lives of the people we love. Liberal religion tells us we all have a common source and a common destiny. Death will come to all of us, and we likely have no say in how or when. We can make the most of this one precious life we have. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Then let go. Be not afraid. And in the meantime, we can share our stories of courage and survival. Every one of us here today has experienced fearful situations. Many fearful situations. From almost comically anxiety-producing to heart-poundingly terrorizing. And so far, every one of us has survived. The simple truth is that we will continue to survive over and over again until we don't. But there's a little problem with how our brains handle these experiences. Over the course of evolution, we've developed what psychologists call negativity bias, as though our brains have become like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. So we remember the scary times as though they were typical. But those countless, ongoing, truly typical times that we and our families and friends have survived all the situations of life, not so much. We could make a spiritual practice not only of remembering all the times we faced down fear and came through alive and stronger, but of bringing them together to compose the stories of our lives. The stories that we tell ourselves, especially about ourselves, mold our brains, they shape our lives, they guide our future. And what about the stories we tell one another, and especially our children, the generations who will build the future? Remember that very large baby whose impending birth brought on the struggle between the Hawks and the hippies? He was eventually delivered by C-section. His mother was able to stay calm and relatively relaxed through a difficult labor with some hippie help. This is what his father, the author of The Fear Project, writes of his hopes for his young son. His world and his capabilities will be as large or as small as his implicit beliefs about the universe and himself, beliefs we are helping him form every single day in a largely unspoken way. He observes our every move, taking in the faith we have in ourselves, in our body language, and the way we gaze at him, our tone of voice. Think of all the evidence of the power of true faith, its ability to heal, to break records, to keep us alive and fighting through the most dire winters. It's actually this feeling of uncertainty that we will survive, we will do better, we will fix these problems. That is likely the reason we're all still here, against the odds. As I was entering midlife, my father died suddenly. 6 months later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and treated. When finally I felt myself starting to emerge from a dark, dangerous, fearful time in my life, still too tender for hope, just a little stunned at possibly, maybe, having weathered this storm, I read this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. It's one of those stories I needed to hear. I've made it part of my story. I share it with you now. For the first time, on the road north of Tampico, I felt the life sliding out of me, a drum in the desert, harder and harder to hear. I was 7. I lay in the car watching palm trees swirl a sickening pattern past the glass. My stomach was a melon split wide inside my skin. How do you know if you're going to die? I begged my mother. We'd been traveling for days. With strange confidence, she answered, "When you can no longer make a fist." Years later, I smile to think of that journey. The borders we must cross separately, stamped with our unanswerable woes. I who did not die, who am still living, still lying in the back seat behind all my questions, clenching and opening one small hand. May we face our fears, share our stories, and help one another to walk peacefully and courageously through all the tough and tender times of our lives. Amen. May it be so.